Good evening, or early morning as it may be. I've been busy at my office today, and so when I got together to talk, it was already too late. So I thought I would do a sit and talk, and I thought I would talk somewhat generally, but also more precisely about where we are several days after this questionable election, that is, in terms of the judgment of the nation and how it came to be. Listening to the commentators, they take as given, if you will, a certain number of facts. They treat them as facts. I want to dissect that a little bit because I think it is a bad way to make policy based on an election that was entirely, if not entirely, damn near, based on disinformation, emphasis, attacks, amusement, and we could identify and put in the room all the usual suspects by which this occurred, but it did occur. And the question is, now that we've had a campaign, however flawed it may have been, how do we go forward to govern? Now, I don't think those who prevailed are interested in governing. I think they are interested in, quote, getting even and changing and, breaking the china. But let's talk a little bit about how we got here. It is a serious error to treat morsels of voting information as instructive of how we liberals should change our message. Now, I made some notes because I want to be careful to cover some of these things, and there are a few quotes, and I'd like to get them correct, which I thought would be a refreshing way to approach commentary. For example, if you're men voting for Trump, and you're a young man, because he thought a certain way, and they did as well, namely that women are subordinate to men and should walk behind them, and men are women's protectors, whether the women like it or not. How do we embrace that message as a policy? Do we accept the fact that it is permissible in America that women should be subordinate? It seems to me, and it's understandable why Trump would propose it, it's a continuation of his policy of misogynist and of men, non-white men, etc., being in charge. Now, let me choose another example. Hispanic citizens. People are drawing all sorts of conclusions from the election, but I don't believe that you can draw these conclusions. But let me give you an example of one of the dynamics that I think happened in this campaign. Hispanic citizens, so the Trump campaign argued, I believe, are right to keep migrant Hispanics out and to punish them and not trust them and treat them as devils because the migrants would limit the job of the citizen Hispanics. You follow me? And so that means the jobs where Hispanics can live and what opportunity they have in America. Now, this is not a zero-sum game, but for the purposes of the election, it was treated that way. So when you see a support of a Hispanic now supporting Trump, is it because they thought they were protecting themselves? Now, this is an old story in immigration. As a kid in the South Bronx, the tales of people in the not so early past, when I was a kid, came here and they were treated badly if they were Hispanic, the Irish, the Germans. Each wave of immigration has had to overcome things. And one of the arguments before or as the wave was arriving was, you Irish are going to lose jobs. You Italians, we're not going to let you in, and so on and so forth. And as a kid, I heard people speak about discrimination in this fashion. So we know that it's a real thing. It does happen. The melting pot is a false metaphor for what happens. We don't really have a melting pot. We have separate entities, and we do mingle and we do cooperate, but we notice they keep their traditions and so forth like that. So when you put one group against another, as was done with the Hispanics, then you have a campaign. How do we feel about that? Did we ever tell, or do we believe it should be a policy to say to citizen Hispanics that get over it? Or do we take care of citizens as well and separately as immigrants that are considered, quote, unlawful? But if you analyze how they are unlawful. It is what? They come here for asylum and they get it or they don't. So that's kind of it. So we have a contradiction of the principle, and the underlying principle I'll talk about in a second. Next up, let's continue the source of the information to the voters. Fraud aside, the nation was flooded by MAGA messages, if you will. The decisions voters made were predicated on false information. How much, what proportion? I don't know. But if there's ink in the water, what do you have? Now, in computer science, there is a concept, maybe you don't hear about it so much today, but garbage in, garbage out, which is to say, if you have a flawed or bias or piss poor information set, that prompts decisions that are no better than the quality of the information you had. So the outcome, in this case, votes, based on what polls tell us was the reason for those votes, should that become our policy? No, I don't think so. And maybe it's true of all elections because the distortion is enormous. The ability to lie for politicians is extraordinary. And in that category, maybe it's hard to say, but I think we might be able to agree as a premise, without regard to party, age, or anything else, that Trump's team pumped more disinformation into the body politic than maybe any politician in history in any other election. So what do we have to work with then? We have large-scale self-serving transactions is at the root of the Trump campaign. So, for example, you're the oil industry, give me $25 billion, give me $25 million, give me $250, whatever the number, and I'll take care of you when I'm elected. If you're saying to Hispanics, well, we're going to protect the citizen Hispanics from those people who are coming here, and they're not you, you are different. Did they say that? What other message could they have that would justify them attacking Hispanics that way in places like Pennsylvania where it mattered? So you had to have a jujitsu description of why you're doing what you're doing to migrants as opposed to citizens. With women, the same thing. Can we sanction young men thinking it's okay to have women be subordinate? It's like losing another rung of the freedom that women did enjoy and should enjoy, on top of trying to compromise their dominion over their own bodies. So what do we have? We have a situation in which, and I don't think we can accept it, do we want self-serving transactions to rule the day? No. Did we deal with it sufficiently? Apparently not. We don't want to have or encourage submissive women by young men, and that be the future of America. We do not want Hispanics turning on migrants because they're safe as citizens and they don't want to have their jobs and opportunities compromised. The MAGA message got out because of stunts. And this is another factor in the information we have by which some are proposing that we make policy decisions for our government. At one level, there was a ridiculousness. On another, it was to get attention for an underlying message to affect a group. And so in plain sight, they ran a campaign of disinformation. And while some were giggling, others were being persuaded and thinking about voting the way they did. This doesn't outlaw the possibility that there were outlaw procedures going on in America, and we'll find out about it or not, but obviously we're not challenging that. We're moving on, somewhat like some would say was the case with Nixon and Kennedy back in 1960, that there had been some fooling around on both sides and that neither was in a position to challenge and didn't, and Nixon didn't, which said something about him. The question is, if you have a campaign as we did, and the objective appears to be to remove reason and to make it entirely about self-interest and to sort of introduce the network line, the movie, if you remember, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. Throw open your windows and do that. If you have that element in a campaign, you're not having a disciplined cognitive decision in the case. Now, this is not news, but to the populace that lives a life and comes to vote, they get less information than those like myself who are political obsessives, who follow these things and care to know what's going on. So in Orwell's 1984, there was a notion of newspeak required in Oceania, and it was a controlled language. And the idea was to reduce the number of words by which people could speak, because then they could control the public debate. They could reduce critical thinking, especially thought crimes. That is, that if you think independently for yourself, that's a thought crime. The evidence of independence that you might have is an offense in a totalitarian state. And to make the totalitarian state work, they shrink or contrast expressions of thought. They have no room for it. So, and they go a step further. For example, the Ministry of Truth gets reduced to mini-true, and they've done that a number of times. Now, you might say, well, who else does that? Well, I don't think acronyms fit, but they can, and they do sometimes. The Nazis did this with terms like Gestapo, as one example. Trump has, and you have to admit, in terms of branding, he's been relentless, and Trump has MAGA, M-A-G-A, as the contraction that identify those people. They don't have the salute, but they have all these substitute ways to make scapegoats out of some, to split groups among themselves, to push out disinformation when necessary, and as a result, garbage in, garbage out. Meaning, the policies now that are going to be declared as the one that the nation wants because of the election were obtained with false information and tricks and so forth. Now, there was a time in my younger life when there were two seasons in politics. There was campaigning, and there were some free throws going on there, but nothing like this last campaign. And then there was a period of governing. And I have to say, it was during the Clinton age when people decided that, it's all time, all campaigning, all the time, 24/7. So building again on 1984, the principle is if you don't have words to speak, you may not have the way to think. So you can't speak, you don't have the words, and maybe you can't think that way. Now, you may have found, as I do, that if you say something that somebody sort of feels but hasn't put the words to it, they are then being informed. When you diminish that aspect of our public discourse, where are you? I'm fond of quoting Jefferson, who says, a nation that expects to be ignorant and free expects what never was and never will be. We're in that twilight zone where we have compromised our ability to make public decisions because our information is for shit. And that's a technical term that lawyers use a lot, usually not in the courtroom. So this leads us to an election in which we are now ignoring how the election was won, and we're asserting false principles to explain the false and misleading information we have that was combined with massive disinformation and with a thumb on the scale by some corporate entities like, the LA Times not endorsing and the Washington Post not endorsing, and people being told probably at the different networks and media outlets, well, you don't have to say this, policy about what news is news for us to hear. So when we hear people talk today about making decisions based on the election returns, they're missing the fact of what is the value of those election returns. Yes, okay, the election was won. We're not challenging that. There'll be stories about it for years probably. But the bottom line is it doesn't teach us a thing about governing. And just winning doesn't mean you can do anything you want, which is the Trump translation of their campaign. Now, another example, and this one is determinative because I think it was the primary impulse for Trump to do what he's done. It is that you can't trust the courts if they charge you committed a crime. And who are we talking about? We're talking about Trump. And the crimes don't exist. It's just political. And in this category, the lead story is the obvious bowing and scraping of those who should be showing independence and courage and following the law and the Constitution, bowing and scraping to power. So I think, we had people during the campaign say there was a slogan, which is to choose country over party. But there's another slogan that Roy Cohn used to use, and I may have quoted it in recent days because he's on my mind, because he is the model for Trump. And these skills, these evil skills that he has, I guess, naturally and further educated and refined with Roy Cohn, and he follows them to the T. And so what you have is the bowing and scraping of what we call the Department of Justice, when instead it is a factory of unjust delay and inaction. And its failure to act gave license to a movement, MAGA movement, to elect a convicted felon who ultimately tried to overthrow our government. What has the combination of pitting men against women and Hispanics against Hispanics? It accelerates the dysfunction on the body politic. And none of this is by accident. And we stand there like witnesses, lording it over most of this nation's life, like what happened in Germany could never happen here. But it has. It really has. The steps have happened. And the weak underbelly of a democracy is its openness. And it has, through time, been abused to this end. That is to choose a few people to have the power, or one person to have the power, but to skim off the top the rewards of an entire nation for the wealthiest and for those select people. Now, what could be more contrary to this campaign than ending the criminal and constitutional justice system, ending the prosecution against Trump personally? And that was the object of the campaign for Trump. Was it the first and only? Pretty close. And you saw that. And he played his part and he kept going. Now, we've already had voices in the last several days, either quotes that were stated and are now remembered because of where we are, and people making and acting to do things that put us at risk. For example, Mike Davis is a Republican. He's a former Senate aide, and he's on the short list to be AG or acting AG if they don't think they could clear him through the Senate if he was nominated. He has promised to raise hell in Washington. He would like the Supreme Court to dismantle our government if he could. He said this. If not Attorney General, perhaps he'd be the White House counsel instead. He was an early disciple of Gingrich. He was a clerk for Gorsuch. Before the election, he proposed a 3-week reign of terror. Who are these people? And he would fire deep state employees, indict Joe Biden, deport millions, put kids in cages, detain people in the D.C. gulag, he calls it, and pardon the January 6th defendants, especially his hero, the Horn Man. And then afterwards he claimed, I was only trolling. I mean, why do you want to believe that? I was just having fun. Yeah, they're having fun until the next step when they do it. I will not cross this border into Austria. So now, what are the Dems doing? I've quoted Robert Kennedy, and the quote that he preferred may not have been his originally, but when the going gets tough, the tough get going. America doesn't have people tough enough for this fight on our side. It's clear. The words are there, the actions are not. You have to follow through. So, for example, you impeach him, you're a Republican, you claim to be faithful to the oath that you took, and you acquit him. Not just once, but twice. You have an attorney general appointed by a Democratic president, and for 2 years, he does nothing involving Trump. This is not acceptable. We were given these tools by our founding fathers. There were no women among them. And they anticipated this could happen. After all, they were dealing with a monarch, with King George III, and so they were very sensitive to it. They were also very sensitive to a standing army. So now we have a guy who espouses those things, somewhat as Adams did, who thought of this country more like a monarchy than of a republic and or a democracy. And that's why that party, the Federalist Party that Adams headed, was cast out in the two consecutive terms of Jefferson as president. So where have we come after all this? We have the Justice Department talking about closing the investigation down, which is separate and apart from this election. It really is. I know what Trump thinks, and I know how he hopes to use it, but why are we acceding to it? So am I saying that they should fight? Well, what is the value of having the truth in a report, which is the current proposal of our not-so-special counsel, instead of trying to prosecute the case before a judge that I think would show herself willing? Should we have that political drama? Should we have that legal fight? Yes, absolutely. And you may have heard they said, well, sitting president, you can't indict. That's bullshit. Because we indicted and prosecuted the vice president of the United States, Spiro Agnew. And doesn't it make more sense to be concerned about having a felon in office than it does to clear the way so the felon you know to be the felon is in office and immune from that? Now, we know what the Supreme Court did, but this is a mentality of hacks, not lawyers, not justices, not doing justice, not having equal justice before the law. So when not-so-special counsel Smith says he's pausing the case, and the judge agreed, what is he doing? He's sitting there scribbling a report that the Attorney General is going to release publicly? Yeah, like he's done everything else with such grandeur and strong statement. No, nothing. This is Rip Van Winkle, the Attorney General, and never should have been one if it matters that you prosecute and bring to justice a president who tried to overpower and usurp the powers of our government to win an election that he lost. And now he's won an election based on all the disinformation and all the dirty tricks that he always does. And we'll find that out in the months ahead. Now, another statement, which is kind of remarkable, is, well, it is and it isn't, because my notion of normalcy is that there are no holds barred on the things they say and they do. Elon Musk says the special counsel cannot go unpunished. So it's not enough that they bow and scrape and do what they want, issue a report that will just be thrown in a dustbin, and that they will be investigated on the Hill by No Jacket Jordan and others. But we have somebody saying we can't have our special counsel go unpunished. Trump said he would remove Smith during the campaign, and he suggested deporting him. Was that a joke? Was that a troll, Mark? Well, they try to have it both ways, and it seems to me that if you say these things, you mean it, and we've seen them long enough that we know that they mean it, and some people would like to brush it aside so that they could get lower taxes, so that they could keep Hispanics out of the country, so that women would be more subservient. All these undeserving objectives are in our system. And some say, when you vote, you get a chance to vote, your personal interest and your desire and so forth. So what would I have us do? Well, I would have us double down on the rights of women. Does that mean you're in the courts, even though they're compromised by having appointees by the president? That is the once president, now president again. The immigration problem, they really don't want to settle it for lots of reasons, and not just campaigning, because there are hidden agendas having a lot to do with what we do with migrants. So, and what about Smith? What would I recommend he do? He should pursue the case until somebody has the massacre like happened in Watergate. That is, force them to fire you. No, you're not a martyr. You do your job until you can't. You don't fold up your tent because of a political campaign compromised in terms of its information and decisions that have nothing to do with our policy. They have everything to do with winning or losing the campaign. They won the campaign, but they don't have a right to govern it with the policies that they espouse during the campaign. And that has got to be our principle. And we shouldn't be apologizing to ourselves. And, I saw there was a pushback to them having a demonstration. That is, those of us who disagree with the election having a demonstration in D.C. And I understand that, because what the point is, we've had enough talk. We don't deliver. And, I have admired Pelosi for years, but her attacking our nominee and how hard she worked, and attacking President Biden, saying he should have quit sooner, this is people thinking of themselves instead of our nation. And I hate to say that about her for all the things that she did. But sometimes we have trouble leaving the public stage, all of us. and we stay too long, we make and do silly things and so forth. Maybe some will say that about what I'm saying right now. So this is a step forward in my thinking about the recent election. It's unreliable to determine policy. My position that we should not compromise things that we can't compromise. We can't say men are more equal than women. We can't say Hispanics should be treated differently as if it's a zero-sum game when it's not. We can't have people ignore the law and the Constitution and the decisions. And when they say that a president can't be indicted, special counsel has said otherwise, Vice President Agnew has said otherwise. And as a nation, to have respect around the world and to pull together this nation for the fights we're going to have in the next 4 years, we have to not just hold that line, we have to fight for that line, and we have to fight for improvements. The needs of this nation did not go away with this election, no matter the outcome. And the people who are in office are more interested in emptying the till to their friends than actually governing and taking care of these problems. So I'm sorry that I was tied up today and didn't get a chance to do a walk and talk. I'll probably do one during the day. But these things were on my mind, and while they were kicking around, I thought I'd mention them. So thank you for listening. I hope you found what I said helpful or interesting. You don't have to agree with me, and some don't. So I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.